Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And I might need a stepping stool or something. But I'm going to get my slides up here. I know that this is a bad time to give a talk at 2:30 in the afternoon after lunch, nap time. Oh, thank you. I sometimes bring boxes. So welcome and thank you very much for inviting me here today. We're going to switch a little bit. We're going to switch up. We're not going to talk about the physical manifestations of your conditions or your children's conditions. We're going to talk more about quality of life, living with a chronic condition. We're going to go into the definitions, determinants of quality of life. We're going to go into mental health conditions with it, caregiver care and self-care, and then we're going to end with questions. So thank you very much, and I want to tell you that I'm very honored to be here. So I have no financial disclosures. Goals and objectives today. Well, there you have it. There's too many moving things. We're just going to talk about some of the things I spoke about, understand the psychosocial impact of chronic conditions, explore the relationship between coping and quality of life, and develop strategies for enhancing quality of life. So before I do that, I just wanted you to know that I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I still have my consultancy business. But before that, I was born and raised in Montana. And the glacier parks were my backdrop. We often went out and went hiking and often went to the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is located in the Rocky Mountains of northwestern Montana, if anybody knows where that is. It's a place where nature rules and access is on foot or horseback. It's grizzly bear habitat. There's more grizzly bears in the Bob Marshall than anywhere else. Wild and scenic rivers and very complex. As I was going down for a hike with my husband, the trail became very faint. And I vividly remember going along a cliff of the mountain and just kind of stepping very quietly and thought what we thought was going down a trail. And the trail became fainter and fainter and fainter. And when I looked up, all I saw was a sliver of the blue sky. I didn't see anything else. And I think of this of how you feel when you get a diagnosis or your child gets a diagnosis. There's no trail, there's no map, there's no GPS. Nobody there to ask for help. You're receiving a diagnosis of a rare disease for your child, and you feel like setting out on a path into uncharted wilderness. So here's the analogy that I wrote. You're leaving the main road behind. At first, you're on a familiar road, sharing dreams and hopes common to many parents, feeling connected to a shared vision and milestones in typical development. But a diagnosis shifts your path unexpectedly, and now you yourself find yourself at the trailhead leading to unfamiliar terrain. You're forging a new path with unknowns. This new path is overgrown, uneven, and often hard to see. There's no clear markers for the journey ahead. You're discovering hidden strengths and tools along the way. You're going to discover strengths that you've never, ever felt before. And then you're going to find beauty in unexpected places. Along the way, every achievement, no matter how small, feels monumental because you know how hard you both work to get there. And then you become a guide for others. We're going to talk about some of the determinants, or when people come in and they say to me, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so, I have this. I know that just like Ernest Hemingway's iceberg theory, the findings in chronic conditions is the tip of the iceberg, and other outcomes are seventh, eighth of what's under there. Because we only define ourselves by what condition we have. But we also have other conditions. We have other life experiences. We have trauma. We have sleep issues. We have response to our culture. There's many things that we have just besides what the label is. And sometimes I think that we forget that we have so much more that's under the surface than what is being said. I've heard this many times since I've been here, but I'm going to stress it again. You're not alone. You may feel like it, and oftentimes when you're sitting and you're putting your head on the pillow and your mind is racing, your thoughts are racing, you feel very alone. Life doesn't make any sense without interdependence, and we need each other. That's by psychologist Erik Erikson. So when you look around this room, I want you to know that this is exactly what a community is. Each one of you is part of a community, and you're sitting on a very long bench right now. Whether it's a leukodystrophy or something else, you're part of that bench. But you're not alone because you're developing a community by coming to these conferences and sharing information, sharing your address, and sharing your stories. So a holistic approach to chronic conditions, it's just not the condition. We also have the biological component to it. It assesses the effects of the disease on the body, like symptoms of daily life, which fluctuate. The neurochemistry, the effects of medication, your immune response, other injuries, trauma, your sleeping. And then psychologically, chronic conditions also have to take into consideration emotions and your perceptions triggered by the presence of the symptoms. Thinking and learning, emotional and behavioral responses, anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders, anger, guilt, grief, stress of the disease, feeling of vulnerability, threat to self-esteem. And then socially, assesses how it affects your relationship with friends and family. But it also affects, do you have access to care? I'm from Montana, I worked in Colorado. Sometimes patients drove 12 hours to see us. And I know somebody here can vouch for that. If they're coming in from Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, they have to travel great distances to come to a center who knows something about leukodystrophies or chronic conditions. And then they have to take off work. Then they have to find parking. Then they have to feed the family. And then there's usually a snowstorm. And they have to deal with that. So holistic approach is, there's many approaches you can take, but you have to take the whole person into consideration. And then chronic condition is a family concern. It's like a ripple effect. If you throw a rock into a pond, it's going to have that ripple effect. So you're the first person in the spoke, but as it goes out, it's the family and it's the friends. And in some of the research that I have found, families are sometimes more judgmental than friends when it comes to fatigue and pain and not going to certain activities. Viktor Frankl said an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is a normal behavior. Okay? And that is so true. When I was training postdoctoral students, someone came out to me and said, "Oh, the parents are really crying." Yeah, that's what they should be doing. They should be really crying. Because getting a diagnosis is wrenching. It's a gut punch. And it takes you to your knees. So it's an abnormal situation, but the reaction is very normal. So understanding denial, I've seen this a lot in my practice, where denial is really a defense mechanism that comes into play unintentionally to reduce anxiety. That's all it is. Denial is anxiety reducing behavior. So if you have a family member who has not been diagnosed yet because they're so afraid, that is because it's keeping anxiety at bay. And there's certain things, there's, like that was mentioned this morning, anticipatory guilt. But there's also something called genetic guilt. And that is when you carry the genetic mutation or variant, if you will, and your children have the disease or condition, and you didn't know it. And it's not your fault, but parents live with that day in and day out, that genetic guilt. The what ifs, what should I have done? I should have known, but you didn't know. And so you go through this grieving pattern of denial. I've been seeing a lot more anger, why me? And then the shock and disbelief. And I'm going to tell you, this is a quick acting. This is quick. You can go through denial, anger, shock and disbelief, and depression and genetic guilt all in the same day. And it's also seasonal. Because if you have trouble walking or with your motor functions, or if the cold affects you, then every time you come up to a new season, you go through some of this guilt again, and you go through the anger. Living in Minneapolis, having motor issues or any chronic condition throughout the winter, people become very isolated. So this isn't a one and done deal. Grieving is an ongoing process, but you begin to adjust and readjust to those feelings over time. So chronic illness marks the end of a previously known world. So you're carrying your child for 9 months and you have a perception of, what is this child going to be like? Is the child going to be like me? Is the child going to be like my husband? What are they going to grow up to be? You have all of these dreams in your head, and then you get a diagnosis, and it's the end of that known world that you had a perception about. And what does research says that parents and families want? I have done this factor analysis 3 times. Patients, parents, and caregivers all want the same thing. They want normality, and they want to get things that are certain. They want to know for certain what it's going to be like in a year, in 5 years, in 6 years. People, we are not born to feel uncertain with anything in our world today or with anything. We're not born that way. We are born to know that things happen in an order that makes sense. And when it doesn't make sense, then that uncertainty builds up. You crave information. They did a study where a doctor put his name on a piece of paper and folded it in half, gave it to his patient, and they guarded it with their life because they finally had a connection. Someone who understands leukodystrophy, someone who's going to listen to me, someone who's going to have compassion. And then you want to build a team. And so you get that team and you slowly build it up. The best team for your region or the best team that you know how. So those are the 3 things anyone with a chronic condition really want. There are some commonalities in chronic conditions: pain, fatigue, depression, and anxiety. And it's not the fatigue that I would feel coming here from Minneapolis yesterday when my flight was delayed by 7 hours. That's not the fatigue I'm talking about. It's the bone fatigue that you feel. And we have that in common. So chronic conditions have that in common, but the 2 most common things they have are depression and anxiety. And what triggers that, whoops, I thought there was one over here, is uncertainty, lack of control, and perception of danger. And just think of a situation in your life where you were triggered. And I always talk just about myself because I can't talk about anybody else. But in 3rd grade, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I had thick glasses and I carried science books. And every time I walked to school, I became extremely anxious because I knew Peggy was at the other end and she was going to beat me up. And so I had a sense of uncertainty, lack of control, and a perception of danger, whether it was physical or psychological. But then I stood up to her, and I went to my 50th high school reunion a couple years ago, and she kind of remembered that and said, "I'm really sorry for picking on you." But that is what it feels like. The closer you get to something, the more uncertain you feel. So what is quality of life? An individual's perception of their position in life in the context of their culture and value systems. It's more than just being alive. It's about how fulfilling and satisfying life feels. And the medical shift was from quantity to quality. That happened about 20 years ago in my career, where we weren't talking about years, we were talking about quality of those years. And each of us can only define what quality of life is to you. When my brother was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma and passed away, the doctor said, "What's quality of life to you?" He said, "I want to see my daughter graduate from high school, I want to take my dog for a walk, and I want to hold my cat on my lap." So the quality of life isn't these huge goals, these huge things. They could be very tiny, very small. Sitting there listening to your cat purr or having your dog look in your eyes. That's quality of life. And there are key dimensions to quality of life. And I put together some of the dimensions, but they're also in literature. And they're different for everyone, but these are determinants or dimensions of quality of life. What's going to affect your quality of life over time? So physical health, if you have pain, do you have stamina? Can you hear? Can you see? Can you walk? Can you feel? Can you taste? So sensory, how well can you get around? How is your sleep quality? And then psychologically, emotions, your self-esteem, cognitive functioning, decision fatigue. And we were talking, earlier about eggs were just eggs. I was raised on a ranch and a farm, and when Mom said go out and get the eggs, I went out to the hen house and got the eggs. Now we go, and if I send my husband to the store, it is like, do you want free range? There's like choices. Too many choices. And when I was working at the University of Minnesota, I had a parent come in and she said, I can't even order pizza for my family. I am so tired of making decisions, I don't even know what toppings. Just get the pizza, I don't care. Because it's so many decisions every day that your mind cannot let down, and that affects quality of life. And then level of independence. So do you still go out and garden? Can you still do things? That is extremely important if you can still do your daily activities. And then social relationships with your family, friends, community support, or isolation, and social media, which is good and positive, not negative. Something that builds you up. Your environment, are you financially stable? I know when I was a clinician, parents would come in, they'd buy a bottle of water, which is a couple dollars, then lunch, then they'd have to pay for parking, then they'd have to pay for gas, then they had to take off work. And then spirituality and meaning, so your beliefs, your purpose in life, and how you come to terms with the purpose of life. So psychologically, we're going to kind of move down now. Quality of life. You saw the dimensions or the determinants of that. Now we're going to kind of filter down into the psychological, the emotional effects of living with a chronic condition. So what is good mental health, really? Let's just talk about good mental health. How do I even know I have it? It's to form and maintain personal or family relationships, to function in social settings, to be confident when faced with new situations or people, or do you want to be isolated because you keep having to tell your story over and over and over again and nobody understands what a leukodystrophy is? And when they think your child or you are on medication, they think you're cured. And it goes on and on and on. Can you perform at work or at school? Learn at a level expected for your age and your ability, participate in other important activities, and your ability to feel, express, and manage a range of positive and negative emotions. In mental health, there are a lot of challenges by the number. So the latest study that I could find is in 2023, and I know this has gone up because of social media and the things that are going on. But a study from 2023 found that individuals with chronic conditions, the prevalent rates were Stress was about 70%. And I think we can all vouch for that. We're always under some sort of stress. And then anxiety's 51% and depression's about 60%. So chronic conditions or chronic illness leads to mental health issues. Mental health issues leads to more chronic conditions. Because when you're stressed out and you're anxious and you're depressed, your bones, remember that holistically everything kind of feels it. And so basically what I'm saying here is we've got an epidemic here in this nation and the world where we are stressed out, we're depressed, and we're anxious. So what does that really mean to be depressed? It's a common mental health concern, but serious. It causes symptoms that affect how you feel, think, and behave, and do your daily activities. To be diagnosed, you have to have the symptoms present for about 2 weeks. Please don't self-diagnose, go get help. Don't take one of those online surveys that say, am I depressed? That could be a starting point. But typically those don't go any further. And then anxiety disorder is characterized by excessive worry, fear, dread about a variety of events or activities that occurs more days than not for at least 6 months. You know what I say to my grandchildren, you're always going to have birds flying above your head, but don't let them land in your hair. Because that's what anxiety is. You have a thought, you perseverate, you ruminate, it goes and it continues on, and then you become excessively worried all the time. And then when you become worried about everything, it's a generalized anxiety disorder. Here's a quote, depression is feeling like you've lost something but having no clue when or where you had last had it. Then one day you realize that you've lost yourself. So there are different signs and symptoms, but there's different ways also to diagnose anxiety and disorder. We go by severity. How long has it lasted? Was it quick? And sometimes people get depressed suddenly. They have an acute case of depression. Social network, who do you have in your family? Do you have somebody to talk with? Views of self and the world, and life's not worth living. And then individual history, like does your family also have depression in their family? And then biological features as well. Here are just some signs and symptoms. When I say signs, that means what other people see. So they see something within you, like your loved one sees something, your friend sees something. And then symptoms are what you feel. And for the most part, you can read all of these or take a picture of it, but they're very specific. But a lot of times people think it's one thing or the other, but you also have behavior. You become very withdrawn, avoid social gatherings, stop usual activities. You become risky behaviors. And as a clinician, when the families used to come in, and they had just gotten a diagnosis, the mothers would always carry a 9-pound notebook, kid you not. They'd come in and everything had like a label to it. Okay, what specialty was this, this, and this? The fathers would come in and I'd say, you know, because I'm a little older, I'd say you're going to get a tattoo, you're going to buy a Harley Davidson, or you're going to get a restaurant. Because generally speaking, men want to fix things. And when they can't fix things, you know, the tattoos come out, the Harley is bought. And it might seem like a joke, but it happens every time the fathers would lift their sleeve and go, too late. So it's just a way to control the anxiety, to control the environment. And women would become a little obsessive with housekeeping and house cleaning. So everything had to be perfectly in order because that is a way that they manage their anxiety. So worries are excessive and typically interfere with psychosocial functioning. They're more pervasive, pronounced, and distressing, and they have a longer duration. And like I said before, there are 3 pillars to anxiety: uncertainty, loss of control, and a perception of danger. And I think that it is more in the community of chronic conditions than anywhere else. There are different anxiety disorders, and I just wanted you to know what these are for your own information. So this is an informational talk. There's generalized anxiety disorder, so it's pervasive, it's chronic, it's exaggerated, and it goes into every part of your life. There's also panic disorder, which is characterized by unexpected and repeated episodes of intense fear, which we often see in children who have medical trauma. So the closer you get to the clinic, closer you get to the hospital, closer you get to whatever, they begin to have a panic. Panic attacks last about 10 minutes. There's not much you can do but be there with them and understand. And then it just subsides in about 10 minutes. Obsessive compulsiveness is an anxiety disorder characterized by recurrent unwanted thoughts and repetitions like compulsions. And then post-traumatic stress disorder is also anxiety when you're exposed to terrifying events or ordeals which have great physical harm. But we are seeing a lot of trauma in children, medical trauma in children, because of the procedures that they have to go through day in and day out. So I hope that a psychologist or life health specialist or someone is on your team to help you through some of those with your child. I don't talk about this very often, but I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, and I think this comes up more often than not, so I want to mention something about shame. I think there's a lot of shame in chronic conditions, and nobody ever brings it up and nobody ever mentions it. But it's hard to even explain to friends and family what your child has or what you have. It's hard to explain to anyone, like even to a doctor, if you don't quite have it together. And you go in front of the doctor and you've got all these things and you're kind of rambling around and you leave and you're just so hard on yourselves. So it's negative self-perception. When a person experiences shame, they often perceive themselves as fundamentally unworthy or flawed. And then you begin to criticize and self-doubt, which leads into depression and anxiety. And shame leads to isolation. So it may feel ashamed of your perceived shortcomings or mistakes. And the brain likes mistakes. I could do 100 things right today. And the minute I leave here and get on the plane, I'll remember something. Why is that? We can be so good. We can do everything just right. And yet one thing will set us off to make us feel ashamed. And then people who experience shame tend to ruminate on their perceived failures and mistakes. They replay past events, thinking, what should I have done? Could I have done? The shoulda, woulda, couldas. And then it begins to wear at your self-esteem, and you begin to avoid people as well. Having shame leads to manifestations such as perfectionism. Some people respond to shame by striving for perfection to avoid future feelings of shame. And I see that in so many parents. They want to be perfect. They want to make everybody happy. They want to do the big Christmas. They want to do the Thanksgiving dinners. They have to do it all. And then they have to come to clinic and feel really put together. Like, oh, I've got a handle on this. And then physical symptoms, the stress and emotional turmoil associated with shame can manifest as stomach, GI, headaches, sleep disturbances, coping strategies. They may turn to maladaptive like over-shopping, substance abuse, or self-harm. And then interfere with relationships and prolonged stress response. So like I said before, navigating trauma in clinic visits, understanding and addressing your concerns, medical trauma really refers to distressing experiences. Without raising your hand, just give me a nod or something. Do your children or you feel any trauma going into the clinic time and time again? Especially with pokes and things like that. Or just sometimes even the smells. So the smell of alcohol, the smell of other things, the sounds, the beeping, the lights. It just triggers up. And we have to be more aware of this and recognize the signs that when your child or you become that way. And then isolation. The last 50 years, rates of loneliness have doubled in the U.S. It doesn't matter geographically, location, gender, race, or ethnicity. Loneliness and emotional well-being are serious public health concerns, and the worst ages are between 18 and 22. Because that's when your kids go away to college or you have to be an adult. And you always had support systems before that. So what are we going to do about it? The action planning for prevention and recovery, and this is something that I wrote, is changes are not always big. Your mental health improvement has already improved just by sitting here and being at this conference. It really has. Just hearing about anybody that you sit with at lunch or dinner and they tell your story, your neurotransmitters actually change because you're telling your story and you're in the presence of people who understand. And they're sitting on the same bench. One of the go-tos for depression and anxiety is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. It is replacing your thoughts or reframing your thoughts on how to react to or think about your problems. So it's going to challenge the inaccurate, ineffective, and unrealistic thoughts. The most common standard practice is this. You start with a thought, then it goes into feelings, and then it goes into behavior. So they try to interfere with that so that it doesn't get any further than that, so you can reframe things. My niece is very anxious. Every time we go over a bridge, she thinks it's going to fall down. If I go near to water, she thinks the wave's going to come and get me. If she goes to the dentist, she thinks the shot's going to go through her cheek. Now, how many times has that ever happened in her life? So we try to reframe it. Is this a reality? How often have you gone to the dentist and he accidentally didn't put the needle in and went through your cheek? Or how many bridges have you been over where they've actually fallen? Of course, it didn't help that I was from Minneapolis and the bridge fell. So besides that case, how many times? And then for mental health, there's several things that we can do that people don't really think about. One of the biggest things is to put boundaries. So no is a full sentence. But lifestyle changes such as movement-based therapy, so physical therapy, eating well as you can, getting enough sleep, and that can be a laughable matter when you're a parent. Activities of any kind, activities and movement. Effective gratitude is the greatest in people with the highest levels of hopelessness. So closing the loop. So at bed, close the loop in your mind. Don't go to bed with the loops open, the thoughts open. What do I have to do tomorrow? Because the loops need to be shut before you go to sleep. Be sociable. Manage stress as the best you can. Because I think sometimes we think we have to do everything. Avoid alcohol and other drugs. And I don't say that lightly, and then help others. So one of the recommendations when I was a clinician was for the children, I wanted them to feel what it was to give back. And so I'd have them choose like 5 or 6 of their toys, and then they would have to take them down to Goodwill. Their mom and dad couldn't take them to Goodwill. I wanted them to go and feel what it felt like for them to put the toys in the box. Because I think if you live in a medical world, what happens is you're given a lot. They have to feel now how to give as well. It's very important that they do that. And then easy daily habits are seek tiny moments or micro joys. Put your true self forward instead of always, saying that you're okay. Cultivate creativity. Find your person that you can let your guard down. Release any harmful relationships. If they're toxic or they're negative, release those. And then return to nature as well. It's hard to find medical professionals. So ask for referrals, use online telehealth services, community and support groups, crisis emergency, and seek out sliding scales for free mental health. I noticed that I'm losing a little time here. This is for caregivers. The silent strength is in every journey. We know physically that there are many manifestations of being a caregiver. And, I was a caregiver. My mother-in-law has Alzheimer's. She lived with us for many years before going into memory care. My son passed away of leukemia, but that's not chronic condition. It was 3 years. And then my stepson, who has Fragile X syndrome, was hit by a car a couple days before Thanksgiving last year, thrown 40 feet and in a coma for several months. And so being a caregiver that way too. I'm not a caregiver on the same bench, and I talk the talk, but I don't walk your walk. But I know that caregiving is hard, and I know that we have to take care of ourselves in any way that we possibly can. This came from Pat Lang, who daughter passed away of metachromatic leukodystrophy, but she wanted you to know that words caregivers should hear. You're not alone, and maybe you can read these too because they're very small. You deserve to be cared for. You're not perfect, that's okay. You're a superhero. Therapy is play, and play is therapy. Make time to enjoy your kids, all of them. You will make heart-wrenching decisions. You won't always get it right. Forgive yourself. Parenting is hard. Parenting a child with extra needs is like running a marathon. Don't lose yourself. Don't compare, because comparison is the thief of joy. The minute you start comparing, even within family members, joy is going to leave you. Make time for your relationships. Trust your instincts. Celebrate the little things. Don't let typical parents get you down. And you know what I'm talking about. And keep your sense of humor. So that came from Pat Lang, and she wanted you to know that. There are differences in mental health impacts between patients with chronic conditions and their caregivers. And you can just see over here that caregivers have anxiety, guilt, helplessness about loved one's condition. They have high, especially due to depression risk due to prolonged and stress, emotional fatigue. They have identity challenges. They struggle with role overload and loss of personal identity. Physical health impacts. They become more isolated. Support needs, respite care, emotional support groups, and then self-care routines, seeking community and therapy is some of their coping strategies. So there are differences in those who are living with it and their caregivers. Caregivers, take care of yourself, please. I want you to recognize the warning signs. It's not selfish to focus on your own needs and desires. In fact, it's essential. to yourself so that you have the emotional and physical energy to care for others. But you have to identify the warning signs. Identify the source of stress. You have too much to do. Uncertainty in what the future holds, family disagreements, feelings of inadequacy, reluctance, or inability to say no. I want you to think about how to manage stress. This is something new because I always hear, oh, take care of yourself, you're a caregiver when you have 10 minutes. Maybe not even 10 minutes at times. Caregivers of someone with chronic conditions live with a unique mix of uncertainty, exhaustion, and emotional overload that standard advice doesn't even work. So let's get into real-life practical strategies. What is in my control? Chronic conditions often come with unpredictability. Instead of trying to control outcomes, caregivers can focus on managing what's within their reach. How the day is structured, saying yes or no. And this is very important. Schedule emotional time. When emotions are constantly pushed down, they leak out irritability, fatigue, and even physical pain. This is what I used to do. I used to set a timer, and I'd set the timer, and I could grieve, do anything I wanted within that 15 minutes. But it gave me the permission to do that. It gave me permission to feel, but on my own terms. And then, have you been nourished today? And I'm not talking about food because the food here has been absolutely great, but have you nourished your soul? Have you nourished the purpose in your life? If you used to paint, do you still paint? Do you still take short walks, even if it's in the backyard and finding a rock? Finding a feather? Just saying, I need 2 minutes. And if somebody says, how can I help? For heaven's sakes, say, I'm going to give you a list, but I cannot talk. I don't have time to socialize when you come over to bring me the pizza. Leave it at the door. Leave them a list of what you can do, but don't think it's a reciprocity, that they have to do something in return. They're just going to do it. I think that is critical. And it took me years and years to figure that out. And then micro connections. Caregivers often feel cut off from the outside world. Rather than big social events, find to stay minimally connected to someone who gets it. So it could be a voice memo friendship. You leave a memo. They can listen to it anytime they want. Voice memo friendships. Where you don't have to call and talk, because when you do, the spaghetti's going to boil over, the dog's going to barf, somebody's going to ring the doorbell, and you're going to step on a nail all at the same time. And that happens. So just say, I want some micro expressions of who I am. And get together with somebody here to see if that they will do that. And then what would you say to a friend? So compassion mirrors. What would you say to a friend if you were in the same situation? So small acts of care are very important. And then self-care, treating the self with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a friend. So what is purpose? I wish this was an interactive talk, because I would like to know, what does purpose mean to you? It's a sense of direction that gives you meaning to life. That's what it is. It's shaped by who you are, your values, your goals, and your connections. So why is it important, though? And it's really hard to get lost when you have a child you're caring for, or caring for yourself, or watching your loved one be your caregiver. It can be involved in helping others, creating or building something, connecting with faith, nature, community, growing through adversity. But just like this road that I was lost in Bob Marshall Wilderness. You're going to find your purpose and the reason why all of this is happening. And even if you don't right now, you're going to think about it and it's going to come to you. So real life resilience, how to build it one step at a time. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the very first step. Because I think a lot of times what we do is we get these big, grandiose goals for our life that we could never really meet. And resilience is really the capacity to bounce back, to withstand hardship and repairing for yourself. Positive adaptation in the face of stress, based on what your genetics and also based on how you were raised. So feel what you feel. Resilience isn't about being tough, it's about being real and flexible. Let yourself be human. Name what's hard. Give it a name. This is grief, this is burnout, this is anger. Find your anchor, whether it's a person, a ritual, or a phrase that you say to yourself over and over again. Take the next doable step, not the perfect step, not all the steps, just one step. Just take one little step. And notice what helps and repeat it. If it's a kind word or if it's something you're saying to yourself, repeat it over and over and over again. Many people say that the bumblebee greatly overestimates their ability to fly because its body is huge and its wings are very, very tiny. But guess what? It does it, and it flies. I want you to never, ever underestimate yourselves. Don't self-doubt yourself. Don't underestimate your strength. One of the greatest mistakes you can make is to underestimate yourself. It's far worse to underestimate than it is to overestimate. The reason's simple. You act in the harmony with the way you see yourself and what you tell yourself. And if you have children, tell them that. You act in harmony with the way you see yourself and what you tell yourself. So doubting your abilities, questioning your skills and competencies will get you nowhere. Comparing yourself to others will get you nowhere. Underestimating your experience and what you've done is impressive. And then don't ever forget the power of hope. Hope is like the sun, which as we journey towards it, casts the shadow of our burden behind it. Hope's not wishful thinking, it's a strategy for resilience. It helps individuals envision the future beyond present challenge. Hope supports emotional well-being, goal setting, and engagement and care, and it fosters connections. As clinicians, caregivers, parents, and advocates, we're hope builders. And every time we listen, support, and believe in the possibility, it gets better. So the belief that the future will be better than the present, along with the belief you have the power to make it so, is hope. And I'm going to open it for any question, comments, wisdom, concerns, or just what your heart's feeling right now. I know that was a lot, but we're ending on hope because that's where it all ends. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be here afterwards that I can visit with you as well. I also, if you ever need any questions on IEPs or education as well, let me know because I love doing that as well. Thank you.